This whole $800 billion bailout that has everyone whooping it up, to Bob's point, who do you think is the one ponying up? We are, or at least the biggest chunk of it. America is by far the biggest contributor to something called the International Monetary Fund. So it pays, we pay. So how do you feel about signing that check? Cato's Dan Mitchell not too keen about it. But Dan, we account for close to 1 of 5 of those dollars that go out. So if it's an $800 billion rescue, we're on the hook for maybe upwards of $160 billion of that. And that might be conservative, right?
Well, especially when you consider the fact that the bailout won't work. All these policies are doing one thing. We're blowing the debt bubble up bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it explodes, it's going to make a big mess. If we had just said no to Greece 2 years ago, we wouldn't be in this mess. But instead, we did bailouts for Greece, then another bailout for Greece, then one for Portugal, and now we're doing it for Italy. And God knows when Spain and France and Belgium come around, we are making the problem worse.
You think France is going to come around? So you think this extends to France?
If you look at the demographics, you look at the structure of these welfare state entitlement programs, maybe it'll happen next month, maybe it'll happen 3 years from now. If I knew, I'd be rich. But it will happen because the welfare state is unsustainable. Same problem we have in America, except it's probably 10 years down the road.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned America. We're lecturing the Europeans, the president of the White House today, effectively saying, you know, get your act together. That would sort of like me giving fitness advice the Monday after Thanksgiving. Having said that, and how odd it is, we continue pushing that. This is a weird world, you know?
Well, it's a weird world when we have a big spending administration in the U.S. lecturing the big spending Europeans about the right policy when they have no idea what to do. But the one thing we know is that both the Obama administration, the IMF, and the European political elite, they all share the same goal: more bailouts, blow up the debt bubble bigger. What we should be doing, what Europe should be doing, and for that matter the U.S., is copy the Baltic nations. A couple of years ago, they did spending cuts. And by spending cuts, I don't mean the dishonest nonsense we have in the U.S., where you increase spending this much instead of this much. The Baltics actually cut spending. They took the Band-Aid off quickly. Yes, it hurt, but they're in much better economic and fiscal shape now. That's the message that should have been given to Greece, to Italy, to Portugal,
maybe
to all these welfare states.
You might be right, Dan, but the Norways and some of these others were also caught up in that debt swelling fray, if you will. So good and bad, you know, sort of hurt by the same, you know, wave, contagion, whatever you want to call it. Do you think there's a risk of that again?
I think there's a risk of doing more of the wrong thing. We know there's pain. We know something bad is going to happen. The welfare states are unsustainable, as I said before. The question is, how do you deal with it? Do you blow the debt bubble up bigger, or do you follow the Baltic nations and take the Band-Aid off quickly? The evidence is so overwhelming that what the Baltic nations did worked. Yes, it hurt for a year or so, but they're in much better shape. It's sort of like being an alcoholic and going cold turkey. I'm sure it must not be fun, but you're much better off in the long run for doing the right thing. And instead, Europe's doing more of the wrong thing, and they're doing more of the wrong thing with our tax dollars, subsidizing it through these international bureaucracies that sort of have this reverse Midas touch. Everywhere they go, they make problems worse.
Well, there's certainly a history of that. Dan Mitchell, Cato, it's good seeing you again.